Our gospel lesson is taken from Luke chapter 4. And we begin at verse 21. And Jesus began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." And all spoke well of him, and wondered at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. And they said, "Is not this Joseph's son?" And he said to them, "Doubtless you will quote me this proverb, 'Physician, heal yourself. What we have heard you did at Capernaum, do here also in your own country." And he said, "Truly I say to you, no prophet is acceptable in his own country. But in truth I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, when there came a great famine over all the land. And Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of Elisha, and none of them were cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian." When they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath, and they rose up and put him out of the city, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their city was built, that they might throw him down headlong. But passing through the midst of them, Jesus went away. The Gospel of our Lord. At times, the word prophet has been confused with fortune teller. But the accurate meaning of prophet is spokesperson. When we search the Bible for this particular word, we discover that neither the Old or the New Testaments provide evidence that suggests any person asked for or applied for the job of a prophet of God. Sometimes I feel like I would say, me neither. Because prophets usually say things we don't want to hear. But Jeremiah, who we meet as a teenager, was planning on becoming a priest. Since he came from a family that had a long history of priests, this seemed quite natural for him. But as often as the case can be, young Jeremiah experienced the God of his people, his own God, speaking to him and saying, "Before I shaped you in your mother's womb, I knew you, Jeremiah. Before you saw the light of the day, I had holy plans for you as a prophet to the nations." And as a teenager, Jeremiah resisted and said, "A prophet? Just look at me. I'm young. I don't know anything about prophecies." And in reply, God said, "Don't say I'm just a boy. I will be right there with you. I will tell you everything that you are to say. Your job will be using the words that I give to you. Sometimes these words will tear down, but other times these words will build up." Well, Jeremiah and his congregation lived during the decades that immediately preceded the total destruction and collapse of Jerusalem in 587 before Christ. And they also endured years of living in exile. They were packed up and sent away to live within the Babylonian Empire, leaving everything that they had behind. One commentator wrote, everything that could go wrong for these people did go wrong. And all the while, Jeremiah was in the middle of it. He was there. He was praying. He was preaching. He was warning. He was comforting others. And all of this he did on behalf of the Lord. And all the while Jeremiah did it, he was haunted by self-doubt. He never thought he should be doing what the Lord had told him he was going to do. And even when he hadn't done it for a number of years, he still doubted himself. So he struggled always with this self-doubt. What happens when the circumstances that we as individuals or communities or churches face when we have our faith threatened? Do we abandon each other? Do we abandon the Lord? Well, in hopes of better news, we turn to the gospel, which is from Luke chapter 3. And we read there that the story of Jesus being tempted by the devil for 40 days and 40 nights. And it ends that he was very successful. He showed this great strength. And having the strength to endure these temptations, Jesus returns to his hometown. And he stops into the public synagogue of Nazareth. And Jesus volunteers to read the lectionary passage appointed for that day, which was the passage that we read from the prophet that we heard just a few minutes ago. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. God has appointed me to preach good news to the poor, to pardon the prisoners, and proclaim recovery of sight to the blind, to set the burdened free, and to announce that this year is the year God will act to bring divine justice to fruition. And Jesus closed the book, returned it to the temple assistant, and then he added this. You have just heard these scriptures come true. Now, the congregation did know him pretty well. The congregation that sat out there and heard this from Jesus as he was reading and saying, it's come true today, had seen him grow up and help his father Joseph, the local carpenter. And because of that, they were more surprised at how well he had read and spoken in the public. More than surprised. They said, wow, where did he get this from? I'm sure he didn't sit, with his father and do this. But Jesus, sensing their surprise, said aloud to them, I suppose you do not believe me. Perhaps you will ask me to perform some of the amazing healings that I have done in the city of Capernaum, which is not far from here. And it's true, he had been doing quite a bit of healing. And I'm sure that it wasn't far, so the news had traveled. So perhaps you will ask me to perform some of these amazing healings that I've done elsewhere, but I realize that a prophet is never given their due respect in their own hometown. Perhaps that is why God's prophet Elijah chose to heal a Samaritan instead of healing an Israelite. And don't forget that the prophet Elisha also had many opportunities to cure Israelites of leprosy. But the only one that he ever chose to heal was a Syrian man. Now, at this time, all of this happening, Jesus talking, I'm thinking back and forth. All of this time, really, two things were happening. First, the neighbors of Jesus and his acquaintances were shocked by how well he knew the scriptures. In other words, he knew what was in the Old Testament. And the manner in which he presented the information convinced them that he really did know his scriptures. But they also realized that he had hit a very powerful nerve because everyone was seething in anger, and in their anger, they literally threw Jesus out of that public synagogue. And they started pushing him and shoving him, and they drove him through the village, where someone suggested, let's just lead him to the mountain cliff and push him off to a certain death. But in all the commotion of people pushing and shoving and shouting, they lost track of Jesus himself, and this gave him an opening to just quietly slip away. And that's the end of our reading. Both the Old Testament and the New Testament lessons teach us that God, who calls us his very own, you are my very own, you belong to me. That God, who calls us his very own, loves us enough to warn us that when we are frightened, when we are mystified by the damage that is being done around us, that God will sometimes ask the impossible of us, even as he did with Jeremiah. And that as Christians, God asks us always to live our lives against a backdrop of that which is greater than ourselves. For when we do, our lives are in the greater context of God's constant presence. And things not only become more manageable, but they are sometimes completely transformed. We find ourselves deeper spiritually and enduring our spirits and intimacy with God. I don't know about you, but a number of people have told me how concerned they are about our world, our country, the things that we see happening, sometimes near, sometimes very far away. And in a way, each of us is called to be a prophet of God. In those circumstances where people come to us knowing we are people of the Christian faith, we can take our stand that when and where there is the love of God with us, we will be able to pull up and tear down, take apart, and demolish what should be taken apart and demolished. and then stand up ready and willing to start all over again. The prophet tells us that they took their stand. And when Jesus took a stand, he met hostility and self-righteousness. I don't know if this makes sense to you because I struggled with this particular assignment. In 1984, Jay Weiner, who was our pastor in Kalamazoo, well, actually it started with my husband. I told him that I thought I was being called to the ministry. And at the time, well, I was a counselor by training before. And so being a wise spouse, he said, go talk to the minister. So I did. In 1984, our minister in Kalamazoo was Jay Weiner. And I consulted with him because I didn't really know what to make of this. Really, I had a wonderful career and was having a wonderful career. And I was scared to death because at that time, women in our denomination had been banned. And so I thought, this is kind of ridiculous to even be thinking about this. But my pastor said, don't be afraid. Just go ahead and do whatever it is that God is telling you to do. And then go wherever God tells you to go, because he'll be right there looking over you. And who knows this time? Just that we have what we call synod meetings, which is, the meetings of all of the representatives of our denomination. And that year is the year that they passed the ordination of women. It was just months after my pastor had said that. And so I thought, I guess maybe there's something to this. And I guess what I would say too is, ever since then, it hasn't been particularly easy. It was very, very difficult to receive a call as a woman. And my husband gave up positions, his job, several times for us to find a place for me to serve. I ended up first in Texas, and then we went to New Jersey, and where did we go after that? Oh, to Southgate, Michigan. Southgate, which is downriver Michigan. And then I went to a place called Mottersville, Michigan. Have you ever heard of it? No. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. Not far from Houghton Lake. A wonderful place. Tiny little farm church, but absolutely marvelous church. And from every single place that I have served, and even from places such as your own where I come as a guest, I've learned that the Lord has such a way, as he did with the prophet, of making you understand and feel and realize that you are where you're supposed to be on his behalf. So I encourage you today to try to do that. To try to discover that over and over again, every day, and sometimes in the monotony, sometimes in the hurry, sometimes in the surprise of it all. Remind yourself that the Lord wants you where you are and will provide for you whatever it is that you need. You may. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our hymn following our message is number 22, To God Be the Glory. Oh, 72. All right. Thank
To God be the glory, great things He has done. So loved He the world that He gave us His Son, who yielded His life an atonement for sin, and opened the life gate that all may go in. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the earth hear His voice. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father, through Jesus the Son, and give Him the glory, great things He has done. Oh, perfect redemption, the purchase of blood, to every believer, the promise of God. The highest offender who truly believes that moment from Jesus a pardon receives. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the earth hear His voice. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father, through Jesus the Son, and give Him the glory, great things He has done. Great things He has taught us, great things He has done, and great our rejoicing through Jesus the Son. But purer and higher and greater will be our wonder, our transport when Jesus we see. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the earth hear His voice. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father, through Jesus the Son, and give Him the glory, great things He has done.
And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May His strength be very obvious to you, and may His calling to you be obvious as well. For He has promised that He will be with you wherever you may go. And now may you go, for He has commissioned you to be His disciples, His followers, to be people who encourage others and show the way for others to find the love and joy that you have in your lives. Amen.